October 21st, 2022 Bethel Board of Education regular meeting to order. It is 7:02 p.m. Before we proceed, we need to appoint a treasurer pro tem in the absence of Mrs. Tina Hageman. So appointing Lori Sebastian to treasurer pro tem. Do we take a vote for that, Mr. Crispin? I don't recall. We do, right? I believe we do. So I nominate Lori Sebastian for that. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. Feedback. I'm hoping it's not me. Second was Danny. Okay. And then I'll call the roll. So, Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Elam?
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue?
Yes.
Me, yes. Ms. Sebastian?
Yes.
Okay, so for a 5-0 vote, it passes. Thank you very much. Ms. Sebastian, will you call the roll for the meeting, please?
Mrs. Mansfield.
Here.
Mrs. Sebastian. Here. Mr. Elam.
Here.
Mrs. Donahue.
Here.
Mr. King.
Here.
Okay, will you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America Thank you. Trying to figure out where that feedback's coming from. Okay. Any additions to the agenda from anyone? Okay, hearing none. Is there a motion for approval of the agenda?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Donahue. When you're ready, Ms. Sebastian, please call the roll.
Mr. Elam.
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue.
Yes.
Mr. King.
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield.
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian. Yes.
Okay, agenda is approved with a 5-0 vote as well. Okay, it looks like we have an approval of the minutes. These are the minutes from October 4th and the October 4th work session and the October 10th regular meeting. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. King. Any discussion?
Yes, Lyda, I just wanted to remind you that I was not in attendance for those meetings, so I will not be voting on the approval of these minutes.
That's okay. I mean, we just talked about this at Capitol Conference, actually, and so you can still approve minutes if you're not there. That was mentioned that that's a perfectly okay thing to do. Just wanted to point that out, that it is okay. The lawyer said so. Like lots of lawyers, several lawyers said so. But it is completely your call. It's perfectly okay. I just did want to point that out. So we have motions. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mrs. Sebastian, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Elam.
Yes.
Mr. King.
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue.
I'll abstain.
Mrs. Sebastian. Yes. Mrs. Mansfield.
Yes. Minutes are approved with 4 approvals, yes, and an abstention. Okay. Moving to the special presentation. Mr. Crispin.
Thank you, Mrs. Mansfield. This evening, or this month's special presentation will come from our Director of Student Services, Mr. Tony Cochran. Mr. Cochran, welcome. Right there will be fine. You may have to turn that on. I don't think it's... yeah, just need to... There we go. You're live.
Thank you. Good evening, Board of Education and Mr. Crispin. Just to have a few notes in regards to the Special Education Department here at Bethel. We currently serve pre-K through grade 12 over 170 students with disabilities. That includes those here on campus and also 6 various programs or homeschool kids throughout the county and actually beyond the county. I'm also the 504 plan coordinator, and so we serve 47 students here at Bethel, and at the CTC, we serve 47 students on those plans. So as we continue to grow, we've been able to add some well-qualified and really professional intervention specialists and aides. I've been really happy with the quality of candidates that we've been able to get over the last couple of years. And I think that when we post a position within the special education department that we've had, again, several applicants, so people are looking to Bethel Township and wanting to move into this area. So that's always good to see. One thing, well, there are a couple things, but that's important to me as the Director of Special Education are to continue developing relationships with the Miami County ESC and the Montgomery County ESC. We currently have 1 student right now in programming in Montgomery County, but sometimes there are options may not be available in Miami County, and so it's important for me to have that communication with the folks down in Montgomery County in case we ever need to access those programs. I stay in touch regularly with the other special education directors in Miami County. We communicate quite a bit, use each other as resources. You know, we continue as a department to meet the needs of our Bethel students and families. As we continue to grow, we have some situations where families may need some resources that others don't. And I look at either my intervention specialist or myself as being a resource and trying to help those families if situations arise. So really, that's the department in a nutshell. I've got a little story to finish up with, and then I'll gladly take any questions you may have. Had a student this past summer withdraw and move out of state, and he required some really special programming here at Bethel due to his diagnoses and situation. And his was a situation where he couldn't really attend school in person. So we had to make sure we provided the right support for him, and it got to the point where we were having him come in a couple days a week for certain times, as well as providing some home instruction. And he moved away this summer, but his mom sent an email last week wanting to know to the intervention specialist if she could get some information. But then she shared that this young man had an amazing summer at his grandparents' house, and he settled into his new school again out of state immediately. The mom attempted to help him at lunch on the first day of school, and it was an absolute disaster in a good way. The student got emotional when he saw his mom, but it was because he didn't want her there. The mom could tell by his initial reaction to her that she should have stayed home. The student used the restroom, ate lunch, did all the things any other student could do and would do without her, and the mom couldn't be more proud. So again, she wanted to pass along her thanks to the entire team for helping the student blossom as a student and helping him find the confidence to start off his new school year without any assistance. And if you knew the situation like I did, like as of a year ago, at the beginning of last year and the year before, that would have never have happened. And I only share that story because that is just one example of the care and I don't know, I guess the detailed effort of the intervention specialist and also the general education teacher to help support that student here at Bethel, to help that young man gain the confidence and the abilities to get back into a school-type setting. So that's just one of the things that I'm really proud of, and I wanted to share that story with you. So I don't know if you have any questions for me.
First of all, just thank you very much for your time and the information, and thank you especially for that story. I work in the hallway with the self-contained classroom, so I love the stories and seeing the students grow, and that's fantastic. And we appreciate everything that you do and that your staff does. That's fantastic. I open it up to comments from the board, comments or questions.
My question for you, first of all, thank you for all your work, all your efforts, and your staff as well, not just you. As we continue to grow, what do you see as the biggest challenges?
Making sure that we have the right number of intervention specialists and or aides to meet the needs of our students that we may have. Making sure that we continue as a special education department to work with the general education teachers and the principals to hear their concerns and to make sure we're meeting those needs as well. Because when you're an intervention specialist, you're not only in charge of a student's individualized education plan and the needs of those students, but you're also making sure you're meeting the needs of your general education staff, and that you're helping you're a resource for them, and that you're helping to a degree to co-teach in that subject area or grade level, and helping to solve problems for that teacher as well. And that collaboration is very important. And on my end, as the director of special education, it's important for me to make sure I'm not only meeting with the building principals and helping solve some of those issues at that level, but that I'm also taking the time and meeting with teachers and answering questions, helping to provide insight, or maybe doing some research for them as well. I think that's a huge part of my job. That's why I'm out and about quite a bit. I definitely meet with my intervention specialists, person to person, at least twice a week, at least pop into their classrooms to help solve problems. Teachers feel free, at least I hope they do, and they do, to stop me in the hallways, to ask me questions, to get my opinion or comment or whatever. So as we continue to grow, getting back to that question, it's important that those kinds of relationships still happen, and that my team, my teachers, my aides are seen as a resource and can answer questions, and that it all leads to helping kids and solving problems and help them grow.
Thank you.
I don't have a question, but Mr. Cochran, but thank you for presenting tonight. And I also want to thank you for all the work that you've done the last few years to bring stability to our program here in special ed. It's been you've done a yeoman's work. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been my pleasure. I love my job.
Go ahead. Okay. Thank you for being here tonight as well. I did want to ask, and it might mirror a little bit of what Lori asked, but I was going to ask if you had any specific goals for this year, or are you working on any particular projects within your department?
That's a good question. It's always a goal of mine to make sure that not only my intervention specialists, but the paraprofessionals or teachers' aides that work with us are being provided with professional development, that they're continuing to grow as teachers or aides. So I look for opportunities for them in that way. You know, the dotting I's and crossing T's of writing IEPs and evaluations, you know, that's just kind of expected for the job, but making sure that I try to, as much as I can, to stay up on any court cases in which it changes the direction that the Office for Exceptional Children in Columbus may provide. So I try to stay on top of that stuff so that I can get information to my teachers and aides. And I would be remiss too if I didn't mention our speech pathologist and also our school psychologist. We added 2 years ago for the first time for the Bethel schools a full-time 5-day-a-week school psychologist, and she just does tons and tons of work. And then our speech pathologist, while we were pleased with the lady we had the previous 3 years, we have a new lady this year that has just come in and just done really great work. And this is her first year in a school setting because she had worked in a hospital. So it's just amazing to me that we could get somebody of such high quality and high caliber. And so goals, you ask me like goals I'm working on. One of the things that I look at as a director of special education as far as one of my goals annually is to provide enough support and resources for the folks in my department that they want to be at Bethel and that they want to stay at Bethel. Because there has been, and Mr. Elam, this may be a little bit of what you're referring to, there was always some constant change within the special education department. And so one of the things that I realized and that I wanted to do when I got hired here was to provide that stability. But as a part of that, you got to make people want to stay. Because being an intervention specialist and or an aide, special education aide, sometimes, that's not easy work. And so it only benefits the schools and our department and our kids if people are happy and want to be here. And so it's incumbent upon me as the director of special education to make sure that I'm providing an atmosphere and direction that those folks want to stay, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for your continued effort in your department. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I'll take the final opportunity to say thank you for being here and point out the positive of the collaboration with the rest of the Miami County special education directors and maintaining our relationships with Miami County and Montgomery County ESC. I think relationships are important, and that's what helps us help ourselves by utilizing resources to help us get anything that's needed for one of our students. So I think that's great. One of the things that I wouldn't say constantly, but I've heard multiple times from different parents is they feel like their child should be assessed. And they believe they should be on a 504 or an IEP, but no one is, they don't know the right steps to take, where to go to get it started, or if whoever they talk to first in the school doesn't agree, what do they do next? Where could I direct them, besides calling you directly, that I could direct them to say, this is what the requirements are, this is the process, here's the forms?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Mr. King. I do get quite a bit of phone calls and or email requests for evaluations, and I do say no sometimes because those decisions are driven by performance data of the student, and so it's not like it was 20, 30 years ago when a parent could just call the school district and ask the special education director, oh, hey, I want my student tested, and then the school would evaluate them. Again, it goes back to current performance data, which includes standardized performance data. A lot of it's based on iReady reading and math scores. There's the classroom data component too, and what the teacher sees. And I know Miss Henry's here, and I don't mean to point her out, but she's an excellent reading teacher. And so when I've got a teacher that says, hey, here's student so-and-so, and here's the data I'm seeing, and I think there's a problem, then that is listened to as well. Now, as far as where can a parent go if they don't like the answer they get from me, you know, they can always, they could call an advocacy group, or they could look at, you know, call the Department of Education, and maybe there's some insight there. But I really feel like, you know, for the most part, if we're not going to evaluate a student within the special education department, there's really good, valid reasons for that. I really try to be a resource for families in that way, you know, and I certainly don't necessarily want to say, well, you can go, I certainly wouldn't like recommend tutoring or anything, because what our students should be receiving during their daily education, it should be enough. So, you know, I'm not answering that really well for you as far as where can parents go if they're not happy with an answer they get from the school district.
Or how do they go about starting the process? I know at one point we had a program on our website that parents could go to. It's kind of like a handbook, but I don't know if it's still there. Is it still there?
There's under the Bethel website, bethelk12.org. If you go under menu, and then you go under departments, there's special education that may have additional information that would help parents. Jacob?
I can tell you, Ms. Sebastian, that there's not probably a whole lot there in regards to Mr. King's answer. I have not put a lot on the website because I feel every situation is different in special education. And if I put a generalized statement in regards to evaluation, I really feel like that puts the district in a bind. And I'm concerned about those kind of things. I will gladly work with any family if they have a concern, if they want to call my office, you know, and go about it that way. But I'm very hesitant to put a generalized type outline or, hey, here's step 1, 2, and 3 to get your child evaluated by our school psychologist. I'm very hesitant to do that.
No, that's great information. And it's nice to know that, you know, there's a whole nother piece to your answer when it comes to the data analytics and how you're looking at their educational progress in those aspects. So thank you.
You're welcome. And if I can add to that point, our school psychologist, who again is in her 3rd year here, she spent a year in Tennessee prior to that. She and I really delve into the weeds when it comes to, hey, look at this student's performance data, look at iReady scores, look at behavioral data, look at any kind of diagnoses the student already has. I mean, we really take each case seriously. But sometimes that leads to, well, I'm sorry, that either yes, we will go forward with an evaluation, or I'm sorry, we won't, but here's why. And I'm obligated under law to once, if I say no, I've got to provide those reasons. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything further from the board?
Thank you, Mr. Cochran.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Leave this on.
That'd be fine. Yes, thank you, sir. Okay, we're at the public participation on agenda items portion. Mrs. Sebastian, do we have anything?
We have one, Mrs. Oh, sorry.
So Julie Reese.
Thank you. So I just had a couple questions on the agenda. Not sure you can answer them since Mrs. Hageman isn't here, but on the 5-year forecast, the last time that we did a 5-year forecast, one of the board members asked about the operating costs of the new K-5 included. So I just wanted to ask if they are included, and that's kind of starting now, right? If they're going to work on it through the winter, and then also once it opens, because it was not in the last 5-year forecast. And then second question is, what is a teacher compensation day? I've heard of work days and service days, but it's, this Wednesday is listed as a teacher compensation day. And the last one is about the classified position of onboard instructor time. Since it is a classified position, I just wondered if it was going to be on the salary schedule. Because it doesn't say whether it's full-time, part-time, or where it's going. It just lists that onboard instructor time as the position. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Crispin, I think there's a couple of those you might be able to answer as we go through the agenda. Is that correct? And then for the 5-year forecast, I believe we're going to have to schedule a special meeting to actually approve the 5-year forecast since Mrs. Hageman is not here. So that question we'll be able to address at that time. And that was all the agenda items we had, Ms. Sebastian, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Okay, so treasurer's report. Ms. Sebastian.
Okay, I am going to just talk about the October financial report since September has passed. Anyone has access to the September report, but the October has the cumulative. I think that would be the best place to start. So this is the bank reconciliation for the month of October. This is the actual cash general fund. It shows our month to date. Remember, the fiscal year for schools runs from July to June. So we are in fiscal year 2023, even though this is November 2022. You'll see probably one of the things I would like to point out, if it's legible, I don't know how big the numbers are on the screen, but you'll see we got an income tax payment in. Those come in quarterly, so our income tax came in at just over $500,000. The big income tax payment is after taxes are reconciled in April, so if you look back to July, you'll see that one is bumped up a little bit. Some people pay a lump sum at the end of the year due to employers for whatever reason not withholding. And then the rest of these numbers have come in. I know Mrs. Hageman mentioned in her notes the all other operating revenues is down a little bit because some of the revenue from the pilot did not come in like she expected. If it doesn't continue to come in, she was going to do research on that. That's line 1.060. I read that in her notes. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next page. My apologies, I'm learning to use a different computer system than I had, and it's not very user-friendly. We'll see if we can get down to the pictures. I think that's where I'd like to spend more of my time, is the graphs. If I can get the mouse to work. Okay, here we go. So this shows a little bit of where does the money come from. And you can kind of see our state and local portion. The state foundation is 33%. Our local tax is a combination of local income tax, real estate tax. And this shows our revenues to date. We are approximately at the benchmark. Mrs. Hageman stated we want to be around 41.67%, and we're at 41.64% for total revenues received in. So a few things we're up on, like income tax, and a few things we're down on. And here's where the money goes. Where do all the expenses go? In most school districts, salaries and benefits comprise 70 to 80% of our budget, and Bethel is no different. And then purchase services and other expenses. Where is that? Sorry. And here's the graph of expenditures. We're a little bit under expenditures by about 1%. And that concludes her report. Are there any questions on that from the board? Okay. These other reports I'm not going to pull up tonight, but they are certainly available for your view. I did want to ask Mrs. Hageman on the investments what our net is going to be at the end, because I did read through that tonight and I wasn't clear on that. So I know she's reinvested all of our money. I did look at that. A lot of it's reinvested till March of this year, because remember, she's going to have to access it to pay all the bills. But I would just like to ask her, what is our, from what we invested, what's our net gain or loss? And we've been in a very difficult bond market, as many of you are aware. As Mrs. Mansfield mentioned, there will be a special meeting called to review and approve the 5-year forecast. I believe that has to be submitted to the state by the end of November. That's approved twice a year. So I'm at the approval of the consent agenda, so do you want to take it back over?
Okay. I do, yeah, thank you. Board members, so Mrs. Hageman had emailed and asked if we could meet on the 28th or 29th, so we can consider our calendars at a later time. We don't have to do it right this minute, but unless you wish to, it's up to you guys. What do you like to do? Do you want to have time to consider your calendar since it's the holidays coming up and everybody's sort of in the middle of it? I don't even know if you have your calendars with you. Okay, and Mrs. Hageman's not here either, so I hate to speak for her for the time of day. I think that's kind of more my concern. We've gotten into this pitfall before, but if you know which day is better, we can pass that along to her. It's just the time of day I can't specify without her,
If we want to do the 29th, I'd prefer doing it at 5, because I have a commitment with one of my children at 7 here. So, it shouldn't take more than half hour, I would hope, maybe an hour.
So you're hoping for the 29th at 5 p.m.?
I can do either day, but if Danny wants to do it on the 29th, I would prefer.
Okay, so Mr. Elam can do early, and when you say early, as long as we're done by, so done by 6? Okay. Mrs. Donahue, what's your preference?
I'm available either day, and I
Either-
can try to be available at 5.
Okay,
It's a little early, but
yeah. Or we could do 5:15 or 5:30. I mean,
as
again,
long
it
as we
probably won't
finish in
take.
time.
As long as, because I think that Mrs. Hageman, when she had emailed, I believe she said she had it nearly done. So we may have several days to review it. It's just a matter of, the discussion time that we would have at that time. So as long as we have several days to review it beforehand, I think it should be fairly quick, as long as we have time to call her and ask her questions in advance. Mr. King?
I would wait to see what the majority was picking, and then I'll advise how close I am to being able to attend.
No worries. Mr. Crispin? What's your schedule look like? 29th works best. 29th is best for you? Okay. I'm kind of in the same boat where I can do either. Obviously after the work day for me, but beyond that, we're good. So we'll just advise Mrs. Hageman about that and then look into her timeline from there, if that's okay. So just so members of the public know, we're trying to lock that down, but she had suggested either the 28th or the 29th was going to be best for her. And that's kind of being our tentative plan, but it sounds like the 29th is preferable for most of us. Probably maybe around 5 o'clock, 5:30, somewhere around that timeline. And we'll get an announcement out as soon as we are aware. Okay? Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, and I probably would suggest 5 if Danny needs to be done at 6, only because we do have a few other items to vote on at that meeting.
Oh yeah.
We have some building.
For the new building?
We have
Okay.
a kitchen equipment to
say.
approve, and
Yeah, you said that in
the
facilities.
interactive
I'm sorry.
projectors. It's okay. But we do need to approve those.
And we'll be discussing
least-
that shortly as well.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're good. It's okay. Okay. Cool. All right, so we, at that point then, for the treasurer's items, we are looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda without item B. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Okay, so Mrs. Donahue with the motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Elam? Okay, just to restate the motion is to approve the treasurer's items on the treasurer's report for the consent agenda without item B. When you're ready, Mrs. Sebastian.
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes.
Mr. Elam,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian, yes, motion passes.
Yes.
5-0.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Mrs. Sebastian. Okay, moving on to item 5, superintendent's report. Mr. Crispin.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Brief superintendent's report this evening. I've posted our enrollment for October. We're still hanging at about 1,900 students. Again, we will continue to update that monthly. While we're talking about counting kids, we were doing that quite a bit this week with influenza A and B running rampant through the building, and we appreciate families being understanding that essentially we were pretty much out of adults to watch our kids this week. At Sunday about 4 o'clock, after talking to all the principals, we had 18 teachers that had already called off sick. And we had kind of seen it coming. Friday was a pretty rough day for us, getting everything covered. But with only 3 subs, and we just couldn't get it covered. And so we'd been seeing the illnesses with our kids. I think on Wednesday, a quarter of our kindergartners were absent, out with the flu. And then I think Friday it was the 5th grade, and making its way through our student body. But if we have the adults, generally we'll have school. But we didn't have adults for this week, which forced us to close. So appreciate everybody's understanding and flexibility with that. Some updates from our construction project. Great news is the K-5 building is on schedule. It is probably, if you spoke privately with our construction folks, they tell you we're a little bit ahead of schedule because the weather has been pretty cooperative. And so the entire building will be closed in by December 6th, and at that point, all the work is inside. We did hit a snag with our flooring manufacturer, mainly the tile that was scheduled to be put in the hallways, the kindergarten rooms, and the cafeteria. And so they'll be presenting some options. They presented me with some options today. It said, give us some stuff to look at. We can pass on to our teachers and principal and get you an answer. Mr. Bird is completing the furniture inventory, and once we have that, we'll be able to talk about moving and also furniture needs for the K-5 building. We received 4 bids last Friday for the synthetic turf project. I sent those to our attorney as well as our Garmin Miller rep, who was helping us, who helped us put together the RFP and knows that side of the business pretty well. So we're waiting to hear back. I did send a summary to the board this evening. So if you have any questions, let me know. But once we hear back from Enos Britton, we'll have a recommendation for the board. Good news that was shared earlier was that a couple things worked in our favor, some mismeasurements on the size of our track lanes, as well as actually a product, our latex product for the track, actually decreasing in price. We're able to complete the entire D zones on both the north and south sides with track surface. Before it was just we were going to have track for the run, or the track surface for the runways, and the rest of it was going to be asphalt. So both D zones, so that's from the end zone to the inside curb of the track, will be actual track surface. And then we'll also be able to put in lane 9. And yeah, it's great. If you can hold a big invitational and not feel bad about having 24 teams and running multiple rounds and that type of thing. So, but the best news of all is that's a savings of about $70,000 compared to what we were going to be spending. And also part of that change is we're not going to have a gray track, we're going to have a black track, which I think you usually see a black or red track when you go to high school track meets. So good news there. Starting to have some discussion about releasing additional contingency funds to finish the 5th grade wing. So we've already walled it up. This is for the flooring, the cabinetry, and the finishing touches that will make it usable for the fall of 2023. So we've asked Tina for some guidance on that and what we need to do to make sure that that happens. But everybody feels very comfortable. We're at a good point to be able to do that, which is great news, because that was finishing the 5th grade wing was #1 priority for the Board of Education. So we're almost there. Mr. Bird's also working on quotes for walkway and a culvert from the back of the parking lot to the new stadium, and so that means that thing's getting ready to take off, and I think they're submitting the plans for the field house for permit. I think that's going in tomorrow. So that's the update I have for the construction project. Any questions for those? No? Before I move on to important upcoming dates.
The only thing I want to emphasize is this $32 million project was funded at no additional cost to taxpayers, and it certainly would not have been accomplished as well or as frugally without the involvement of Garvin Miller and Peterson Construction Company. I cannot say enough good things about how they've managed this project.
Anyone else? Okay, moving on. Upcoming events. So Wednesday, November 23rd, Teacher Compensation Day. So I don't know the specifics of how this calendar was put together. Wasn't here for that, but generally Compensation Day is it's kind of paying the teachers for open house and or conference time that they spent earlier in the year. And so we've had a couple of conferences. Is that what it's conferences? So that's how we compensate teachers for that extra time. And we have one of those this Wednesday, 23rd. Then we have Thanksgiving break, the 24th and 25th. Sunday, December 4th, that's the National Honor Society induction ceremony. And don't have a time for that yet, but I'll get that to the board in the event you'd like to attend. Sunday, December 11th at 3 p.m. is the annual BHS winter concert. And then Wednesday, the 14th at 6 o'clock is the BES and BMS winter concert. And talented folks in both areas. And if you were here for the middle school musical, just totally impressive. Miss Wolford gets middle school kids to do for 90 minutes and stay focused. Very impressive. Also, let's see here. Yeah, Wednesday, December 14th, Thursday the 15th, and Friday the 16th, we have 1 hour early releases. Monday, December 19th through Friday, December 30th will be Christmas break. Tuesday, January 2nd, no school, but that is a teacher workday, so no classes for students, and then classes resume January 3rd. Those are important upcoming dates and events. And that's it for the superintendent's report this evening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Crispin. Anyone have any follow-up items? Okay. Moving on to number 7, recommendations for classified personnel. Back to you, Mr. Crispin.
Thank you. So 3 recommendations under item A. Travis Schaefer, a bus mechanic. We've already been able to use his talents as our buses have been breaking down. Our latest was I think that was on Friday, and ironically, as it was getting towed, we received a call almost within that same hour that our 2 buses were getting delivered on Tuesday, and they actually came today. So sorely needed, but we're going to have a great guy with some very good bus mechanic experience keeping up our buses. Then Sheila Afflin, recommending her to be our second shift custodian. And then Matt Reed to be our replacement for Mr. Hutnick, who left us a little bit early. But Matt comes with 3 years experience at St. Paris Graham Local Schools. So those are my recommendations for classified personnel. We have a resignation of a special ed aide, Megan Houston. We have 1 volunteer under the classified section to approve tonight, and that's Tyler Weinert for middle school boys basketball. Placement of our healthcare clinicians on our new classified salary schedule that we approved last month. And then Gail Rhodes, that's for onboard instructor time. That's not a new position. That's just a service that we're paying her for. And that's pretty cheap for onboard instructors, if I recall. Those are my recommendations for classified personnel this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Crispin. Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda for classified personnel.
So move.
Thank you, Mr. King. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. Discussion? Any discussion on these items?
Just wondered, because it is fairly new for everybody, as a training instructor, I know that Mrs. Rhodes did that as part of one of her details of her job when she was employed full-time. And do we have an estimate? Will she come in as needed when there is a new substitute driver that needs to be trained, and how will she be notified, and will that take a certain amount of time for each level of training? Can we expect like 4 hours for a certain?
Yeah, so there are requirements that they have to get in. It's like,
Yeah.
driving with, while you have your temps, right?
Right.
I don't have those. I can get those for you, but Mr. Fugate and usually takes care of that along with Kathy, and making sure if we have somebody new, getting them scheduled. And it's very nice to have somebody that's an onboard instructor that knows your district. In a lot of other areas, you share that person, and you might get somebody that really doesn't know your area and that type of thing. So we're lucky to have Mrs. Rhodes. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I can get those hour requirements for you. Yep.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
And also, I believe it's not just for new hires, it's a continuous re-eval. After
There is a
1 or
re-up.
2
Mhm.
years, they have to ride with an instructor as part of the requirements as well.
Thank you. Yeah. I just know she's retired. I was wondering how busy this would keep her.
But we're still short 1 driver. So anybody's out there, we have an awesome onboard instructor
Mhm.
to get you trained.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Okay, hearing none. Mrs. Sebastian, will you please call the vote?
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Elam,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian, yes.
Okay, approved with a 5-0 vote. Moving to recommendations for certified personnel. Back to you, Mr. Crispin.
Thank you. We're recommending the employment of 2 long-term subs, Christine Smith and Young Fives, effective this Wednesday, and Heidi Henning, which we won't need. Heidi's still working for us, but we'll need her again January 9th in the new year. Section B, 2 certified folks. If you remember, we originally hired Tiffany Pikus as long-term sub, but she has since re-upped her license, and we want to move her to a 1-year limited contract for the remainder of the year, so that'll be prorated. And then Jennifer Rushley, our 2nd grade teacher who we courted for some time, was released early. We didn't think she was going to be released from her other position until the end of December, but she is with us, and we're grateful for that. So those are my 2 recommendations for certificated hires tonight. Then we have a whole host of supplemental folks to approve. Math club advisors, as well as Mr. Clute, our spring head coaches. So Mr. Clute, Mr. Goulet, and Ms. Pikus. Our monthly ESC substitute teacher list for approval. And then we have 2 corrections in E and F for errors where we place folks on the salary schedule this year and last. So we need to make those corrections.
Okay, thank you. I misspoke. I said classified again. It's certified. My apologies. Okay, looking for a motion for the approval of the consent agenda for certified personnel.
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Donahue. Discussion, please. Any questions, concerns?
I actually just wanted to double check. Is the step correct on Mrs. Brewer's? Because in one column it says step 22, and in the second one it says step 24. That's correct? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, my apologies.
Okay, further comments? Okay, hearing none. Mrs. Sebastian, will you please call the vote?
Mr. Elam,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian, yes.
Okay, motion carries with a 5-0 vote. Moving to recommendations for business. Mr. Crispin?
Thank you. Only one item this evening. We have 2 proposals for student-led groups, and one is at the 8th grade, for 8th grade only. That's Elevate Youth, and Ms. Seebach has agreed to be the advisor there. And then Club 180, which I understand had previously been a club that had met, I think, during lunchtime, and then faded, and now is back as an after-school gathering for students. And Mr. Hamlin has agreed to be the advisor for that group.
Can't click fast enough. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda for business items?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. King, thank you very much for the second. Discussion.
They appear to be 2 very worthwhile endeavors for our students. All for it.
Further comments?
I think I'm really happy to see Club 180 here, as it focuses on the spiritual wellness and religious wellness of all our students. And so I think that's something that's been needed and a positive impact on our students. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything further from the board? I think that about says it really for all of us, really. Okay, hearing none, nothing further. Mrs. Sebastian, will you please call the vote?
Mr. Elam,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian, yes.
Okay, passes also with a 5-0 vote. Moving then to discussion. First up is the BEA update with Mrs. Brewer.
I want to thank you for making that difficult call on Sunday to give us a break. For someone who's been using my plan period to cover other teachers, I appreciate it. It's really hard to be an excellent teacher when you're running on empty, so I appreciate it. Thank you. We also want to thank the subs that we do have in the building for showing up every day. When they sub, but since they're a sub, they can stay in one classroom, and then when that teacher has a plan period, they are then asked to sub in another classroom. So they, in a sense, never get a break. So thank you to them. I also want to thank the classified staff. They too have been running ragged. The secretaries trying to find subs, the bus drivers doing double routes, the food service, the custodians trying to keep everything clean and sanitary. So I just appreciate that. I hope everyone has a restful, healthy Thanksgiving. And go Buckeyes.
Thank you, Mrs. Brewer. Appreciate it. I don't believe we have any technology committee updates. Facilities committee. Who's running that one? Our chair, our secretary, our chair. We did really discuss it under early items, but we do need to do a summary under the actual board item. So who's doing it?
Oh, I'll do it.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, this is the Bethel Elementary Progress Report. Actually, it's a progress report for both construction projects. Dated 11/21/22. Masonry veneer installation is taking place in Area 1 and 8 and 9. These are classroom wings, the kitchen, and gymnasium. Roof installation is complete to where the building is completely dried in. Window installation has begun and will continue to follow the masonry veneer installation. Metal stud framing work is ongoing in Area 6 and 7. That's classroom wing and administration. Drywall hanging has begun in Areas 5 and 6, as are both classroom wings. Overhead mechanical and electrical work along with in-wall rough-in work is ongoing throughout as needed. For site work, asphalt paving for the east parking lot actually began today. At the athletic field, concrete sidewalks and curbs are complete around the outside of the track, minus the access opening. D-zone concrete runways and trench drain work is ongoing. Contractors are doing their best to get the asphalt base course installed before the asphalt plants shut down for the winter. That is the core report for our construction project.
Any additions or comments from anyone?
Nothing that hadn't already been said earlier in the meeting.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. All right, moving to liaison reports. Do we have anything from our legislative liaison?
Yes, in fact.
Excellent.
last week, the State Board of Education passed a resolution calling upon the General Assembly to end the practice of mandatory retention of students under the third grade reading guarantee. The board's resolution passed by a wide margin. In order to become law, House Bill 497 needs to be passed by the Ohio Senate before the end of the year. Changes to elections and voting rights poised to move in a lame duck session. A substitute version of House Bill 294 was unveiled. It would make several changes to election laws and voting rights. The bill would require voters to use a photo ID. Current law allows voters who do not have a state-issued ID to use utility bills or bank statements as identification. It would also eliminate August special elections. And House Bill 544 provides an expedited pathway for renewing expired educator licenses, which there's a lot for that, but that's what it's all about.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. We need to actually make a quick appointment here, actually. But since we've approved the agenda and it doesn't actually say appoint Mrs. Donahue as Miami Valley CTC liaison, I didn't officially say those words at the work session, and we've approved this agenda, we would need to vote to amend our agenda for me to be able to do that. So.
Is it voting, because you're just appointing a liaison, right?
Mm-hmm. But it's not on our agenda to do that. So we'd be voting to change the agenda, and then I can do it. So.
I make a motion to change or update the agenda.
Second.
Okay. So thank you very much for that. Mrs. Sebastian, will you call the roll on the vote to amend the agenda to include the naming of the CTC liaison? Whenever you have a moment. I didn't notice that earlier. I apologize.
Okay, so Jacob moved to amend the agenda to name the CTC liaison. Mr. Elam seconded.
Correct.
Are you ready for me to call the roll?
Correct. Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Elam,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue,
Abstain.
From changing the agenda? I'm not naming you yet. We're just changing the agenda.
Miss,
Then that's a yes. Is that a yes? No. We're just amending the agenda to name one. You're okay.
yes.
I'm a yes.
Mrs. Mansfield.
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian, yes, so the motion passes 5-0.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to amend the agenda. And then now at this time, I would like to name Mrs. Donahue as the Miami Valley CTC liaison for Bethel Local School Board, as is in my purview to do. And thank you, Mrs. Donahue, for taking on that responsibility. I appreciate it. So enjoy that. It's a good post. Okay. Athletic liaison, anything to report? I'm just going to assume you have nothing to report because you just got it. So we can move on. Is that okay?
I promise to have one next time, in December.
It's okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for serving.
Well, we had, the girls had a wonderful first home game. Mr. Elam and I were in attendance, and they got a little slow start, but it was exciting to see. We had 2 freshmen in and the regular starters, and so thank you to all our coaches who are helping out. I think all of our positions are filled, and we have several volunteers, so thank you to them. That's all I have to report.
Thank you very much. And then now OSBA Capital Conference debrief. I know that Mrs. Sebastian, you had some comments at the work session. Do you care to elaborate or include those here?
Yeah, I went to several different classes and then to the vendor booth. The most exciting presentation I went to was on the Fair School Funding Act. I know I'm a finance person, so most people would not have found that exciting, but I did. I got to meet John Patterson, who was one of the co-sponsors of that bill. He is no longer in the Ohio Congress. He is, I think, doing a agriculture assignment right now, but he's a very dynamic speaker, and he's a retired teacher, actually. I don't know how many people knew that. We are currently in our 2nd year of the funding for the Fair School Funding Act. It's designed to be implemented in a 6-year cycle. The good news is we have the same governor, but both Cupp, who is also a sponsor of the bill, is no longer going to be in office in December. And like I said, Patterson's already off the legislature, so you have two people sponsoring the bill who are not in the Ohio Congress anymore. So with Governor DeWine, if he thinks this is a priority, Ohio Department of Education, my understanding is already has submitted the bill for this year. The reason it's a big deal is if they fully fund the Fair School Funding Act, it's a big deal for Bethel, because right now we're capped and we're growing. So it's a big financial, will be a plus for us if it continues. So we will wait and see. The Ohio budget looks good right now. So I am hopeful, but as with any funding formula, it sometimes can change. They've separated several things out. One of the things, interestingly, several of the audience members mentioned was open enrollment and how that was funded. It's just different in the new formula, and they're trying to figure out how that's funded. So, but they've got wide, I was pretty impressed with how the committee was formed. They have treasurers, they have superintendents, they have politicians. It was designed with schools in mind. It wasn't done in isolation in the political environment. So I'm very hopeful this bill will be an improvement of the unconstitutional funding of schools, which we know has not gone anywhere in approximately 30 years. I think what was the case, 1991? So it's been quite a while. So we'll see where that goes. That's actually the case. The 1991 case was what I did my school law project on when I did it, and it was a very fascinating read. So I was very excited about that. I also went to a couple of legal presentations, and the guidance from those presentations was consistent with what we've been told by our attorney. So that's what I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Sebastian. In my sessions, I actually kind of went a different route. Yes, there were there seemed to be a tremendous focus on a lot of student wellness this year at OSBA. I chose to attend a great many of those sessions, as well as some technology in the classrooms, a lot of sessions on instructional supports for students, as well as their behavior, a session on some new regulations. I know one was on new regulations on recognizing dyslexia, things like that, as well as arts and education. So a lot of that was more on things that would help me in the classroom to be a better educator, as well as to support our educators being in the classroom as well. So I kind of took that path a little bit more so this time around. So it was a great conference this year, actually. And John Lithgow spoke as a keynote speaker on Tuesday, and he's fantastic. So it was great. Yeah, got to meet him too, which is pretty cool. Just a small perk. And that's all I have. And I think that Mr. Elam was unable to attend, unfortunately, but that was it. Okay. All right, moving on. I think that's the last item for our board updates. Is that correct for discussion? You didn't go, Mrs. Donahue, right? Mrs. Donahue, you didn't go. Is that correct? You chose not to attend this year. Is that correct? Okay. I don't want to overlook you, is all I'm saying. Okay. Excellent. I just don't want to leave you out. All right, moving to public participation then. I have just a couple of slips. It appears, very thin stack. Carolyn Wright.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Wright, Bethel Township community member, former alumni, well, I guess not former alumni, parent of two children who graduated in the class of 2016 and 2018. And I'm here again to discuss the attacks on transgender and the LGBTQ community here in our school. I'm particularly sad to be here tonight in light of the shooting in Colorado Springs that specifically targeted the LGBTQ community. And I'm particularly sad because the shooting happened just a few hours after the Transgender Day of Remembrance ended. And the Human Rights Commission issued a report on the Transgender Day of Remembrance, noting the 32 transgender people who were murdered this year. In that report, they specifically cited the political impact of anti-transgender policies and efforts. They specifically discussed the attacks on transgender athletes and the school bathroom issues. And it just really resonated with me of how political so much of this has been. There's been a concerted effort across our country to attack transgender youth as a way to score political points. And when you see the direct impact of a young man going into a club and murdering 5 people and injuring another 25, it's not hard to see how hatred fuels. And I'm continue to be saddened and dismayed at the attacks against kids. These are kids. These are someone's children. These are our students. These are our residents. These are our families. These are friends of the rest of the students. There are 32 people murdered this year, and I have yet to hear of a single student that has been assaulted in a bathroom or has been in any way harmed by the inclusive policies that the school board has continued to defend, and I thank you for that. I think it's just another important reminder the impact of hate and the cheap political points that people continue to try to score by attacking vulnerable youth. That's all I have to say tonight. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Bronwyn Crowley.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to speak on the lack of transparency and the outright refusal of some in this district to be accountable to their electorate and their community. Since January of this year, many of us in this community have submitted requests for public records. While some have gone smoothly, many others have been met with missing information, excessive redaction, extensive delays, or a total lack of response. I could offer up multiple examples of each, but here are a few of the top ones. On March 29th of this year, a public records request was sent pertaining to a teacher in the district. One part of the request was for any complaints received by the district about this employee. The response received from the school was that, quote, "There are no records that are responsive to this request," end quote. I know for a fact that is not accurate, as I submitted one myself prior to this, and I asked that it be made part of this teacher's permanent file. I know of multiple others who have previously done the same, and I had several of those documents already in hand, yet a search returned nothing. Another example was a request for emails between one board member and a member of the Bethel community. We knew this email string existed as we had part of it from the community member themselves. The record request was very specific, even including the email addresses involved. The response, quote, "There were 0 results for any email conversations matching these criteria," end quote. It was only when we stated that we knew, in fact, that they did exist that we received one record. Let's talk redaction for a second. While the district can redact personal information, the record should not be so blacked out that it looks like something out of communist China. Take a look at this one received in May of this year. Does this look like transparency to you? Or is this okay? The latest issue I've had is with extensive delays and now a complete lack of response. On October 1st, I submitted a public records request for information pertaining to the search and selection of our newest BOE member. I received acknowledgement on October 4th that my request was received. Fast forward 23 days when I sent an inquiry as to the status of this request, as I had heard nothing further. I was told that day, again, October 4th, that the final review would be done and the records would be sent that evening. It's now November 21st. I've sent 3 subsequent emails that I received I sent 3 subsequent emails since October 27th with absolutely no response. The time frame given in the acknowledgement email I received on October 4th was 3 to 5 days. It's now been 51. If I didn't already seriously question the way in which this replacement board member selection process was handled, I certainly would now. Why the refusal to turn over documents if everything was done above board? Now, for the last several months, I've sat quietly and listened to a few people in this community talk about frivolous lawsuits currently facing this Board of Education and Bethel local schools. Let me be clear, nothing about the safety and privacy of the children in this district is frivolous to me. It shouldn't be to you either. There is nothing more serious or that has more value than every child in this building that has been placed in your care. Protecting them will never be frivolous. So I ask you, what recourse have you left for concerned citizens, parents, grandparents, and Bethel Township citizens? It's been 10 months of citizens asking this board and administration for answers to our many, many questions. 10 months of emails, 10 months of phone calls, 10 months of coming to every damn meeting, as our last speaker would say, to ask questions to your face, 10 months of waiting for answers, waiting for you to do something, anything, to ensure privacy and safety for the students at Bethel. You voted to hold a community forum to address concerns and answer questions, but you have absolutely refused to follow through. You have no public discussion, so we can hear your rationale. We have no idea how any of you even feel about the issues at hand. I can only think of 2 reasons. You lack conviction of your own choices, or worse, you feel that the parents in this community are not deserving of an explanation. You have put yourselves behind a wall and acted like you have no responsibility to answer to those elected to you. You've left the community no choice but to seek a remedy through the courts. So I ask, even though I know your answer will be, this isn't a Q&A, what should this community expect of this board that was, apart from one, elected to represent us? More silence? More deception? More broken laws? More lack of action? More lack of transparency? Because that's what we're getting, all of that. Your community overwhelmingly does not support your decision. They've not only signed removal petitions once, but twice. That should make their view loud and clear to you. And to be clear, this is a decision you made. Both Ohio and federal law allow for you to make a choice other than what you have done. Other schools have handled this situation differently and still are in accordance with the law. But you decided to put Bethel children in this unnecessary and uncomfortable situation. My resolve to remove 3 of you and reverse your policy is stronger than ever. I'm not backing down, and I'm not going away. I will continue to fight for the safety and privacy of my daughter and every child in the school. You awoke the one thing in me that will get me off my couch to fight. You put my daughter in danger.
And that's all the slips we had for that. So next is executive session. Is there a need for executive session this evening? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Thank you, Mrs. Crowley. I've left that out.
For the record, I just wanted to correct, I chose not to go because I could not attend on those dates to the OS.
No, that's okay. That's perfectly okay.
Well, I just wanted-
I didn't want to, I didn't see you there, and I just didn't want to not ask you for a report. That's all
Yeah,
I didn't know.
Just
It's
wanted to
perfectly okay,
clarify.
though. It wasn't a slam. It wasn't any
Okay.
kind of a commentary. I just didn't know if you had gone, and I just didn't see you,
No.
because no one had
Thank you.
told me one way or the
Thanks.
other, if you
No,
were
I
gone.
just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure it was
We all
correct on the
report to
record.
Tina individually, and no one ever said collectively, were we going or not?
I'm hoping
so.
the dates work for me next year so I can attend.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful experience, and I hope you do. It really is great.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, for sure.
I hope so. I hope.
Yeah.
we can
And if you can't
Thank you.
make the OSBA conference, there's a Board Leadership Institute.
Yes, which is
Usually in the
also really
spring.
great.
Yeah.
It's really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they do have the 101 session in January, early in January, so
Good.
that's always a good
Yeah.
option as
And
well.
it's a great opportunity to meet. The best part about that one is you meet other board members that are,
Yeah,
you know,
newer.
kind of newer to it
Yeah.
and excellent, and you just build those relationships with people. You can go, you know, hey, I don't understand this. Have you learned about that? Or what's going on with your district? And, you know, the networking opportunities is the best thing about OSBA is the networking and getting to
Yeah.
know other people. So
Yeah.
I just really encourage you to get to know other board members. It's other than just us. We're our own little, you know, hive, right? Literally. And so
Yeah.
it's just really good to branch out and meet other people who are going through, you know, the stuff that we're going through and learning the stuff
Yeah.
we're doing and
Similar and
and
different.
trying to, you know, support our superintendent, support our treasurer, and just have other people to ask questions and reach out to is great, because so we're not so insular, right? It's just good to build those connections. So I highly encourage it. It's excellent. So yeah.
Thank you, that's
Yeah.
all.
No, you're welcome. Absolutely. Back to executive session. Is there a need for executive session this evening from anyone? I'm seeing some no's. Mr. Crispin? Nope. Okay. Fabulous. Then I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Anybody?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. King. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Elam. I'm sure there's no need for discussion on that one. When you're ready, Mrs. Sebastian.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Elam,
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian, yes. Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue.
Yes.
Okay, meeting adjourned at 8:21 PM. Thank you all for your participation and your participation, your presence, and coming to our meetings. Appreciate your time. I said 8:21 PM, yes.